We're halfway to Sunday, June 6th. It's summertime. George Gershwin tells us the living is easy. I hope so. Summertime means you can gather for worship inside First Congregational UCC once again. Many of you have told me how much you long to do that. Summertime is also the season of the Spirit in the church. We've celebrated Pentecost. We remembered and know that God has not abandoned us but given us the Spirit. And we're going to feel that Spirit as we rejoice in joining with one another in worship once again. In both Hebrew and Greek, the word for spirit is the same word that is used for wind, for breath, for our spirit, for God's Spirit. This summer, as we worship, the scripture and hymns will be about spirit and wind and breath and God's Spirit. We begin this week with the first creation story in Genesis. The New Revised Standard Version translates Genesis 1:1 with these words. In the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth was a formless void, and darkness covered the face of the deep, while a wind from God swept over the face of the waters. The New International Version translates it this way. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. Note the difference. One is wind, one is spirit, both from God. Both are legitimate translations. Either way, the source of the breath, wind, Spirit of God is present at the beginning of all things. Now, for some, this is exactly how creation happened. That would be their science. I agree with the commentators who say the writers are using the science of their time to tell us important things about God and creation and the goal of that creation. Science changes. They would write the story differently now. The important question for me, and I'll be so bold as to say for us, is whether what they wish to say about God and the creation is worth hearing and trusting. Scholars tell us that the story was written while the Hebrew people were in exile in Babylon. The Babylonian gods seem to have triumphed over the God of Israel. Our parents in the faith said no. Their God was still God and had created the world. This is how it happened. And even though things and their life seemed bad, God called things good and would work to make and keep them good. Unique to Israel was the belief that God was still God. Their God was still God. And what had happened to them was not because God was weak, it was because of things that they had done. God was and is able to start again with them and would and did. When they talked about the creation of humankind, they were talking about themselves. They had a job to do. They were created in God's image and were to do God's work. We translate the job they were to do as dominion in most biblical versions and translations. Dominion can be a good word or a bad word, and I'll talk about that some this week and more next. Indeed, trying domination had gotten the Hebrews into trouble, but they could and they would start again. So as we emerge from a bad time, like we can trust God. We can look for ways to be faithful as we start again. You have a good heritage in this place. God's created you in the divine image. We can be part of God's goodness, and that is one of the blessings in this story.